Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to reach your ears. For more than a century, this story lay buried in sealed trunks, family vaults, and private church archives protected by men who believed the truth itself was too dangerous, too corrupting, too humiliating to their legacy to ever be spoken aloud. And yet, here you are, hearing the first crack in a wall of silence that was supposed to last forever. Imagine the sound of a name being erased. Not forgotten, erased. Ink scraped away, records rewritten, an identity dissolved as if the boy it belonged to had never drawn breath. That is what happened to an 18-year-old enslaved young man named James Rutledge, somewhere in the western counties of Virginia, between 1847 and 1849. 3 physicians signed off on a corrective procedure. Medical necessity, they called it. No details. No testimony. No explanation. Just bureaucratic language wrapped around a human disappearance. But the truth, when you follow it long enough, always leaks through the cracks. Tonight, you and I step into the shadows behind those records. Not to sensationalize suffering, but to expose the machinery that allowed a boy's life to be consumed, reshaped, and finally destroyed by people who wrapped their depravity in the illusion of refinement. This is not a story about lust. It is a story about power, the kind that rots a soul from the inside until its owner mistakes cruelty for entitlement and obsession for authority. James was born property, but he grew into something far more dangerous to the world that owned him. A young man admired for his skill, respected for his discipline, and noticed for his presence. Too noticed. A threat without ever raising a hand. A temptation simply for existing. In a system built on domination, even a hint of dignity in the enslaved was seen as rebellion. And in Belmont Hall, the Sutherland plantation, a rebellion of perception was enough to mark a young man for elimination. Before this night is over, you will understand exactly how a wealthy, respected household allowed desire, jealousy, and absolute control to converge into a decision so irreversible, so morally poisonous, that the family spent generations burying the evidence. This is the descent. And once you begin, you don't come back the same. Let me take you deeper into the part of the story polite historians step around, the part plantation diaries reduced to euphemisms and church records veiled behind confessions that never named names. Because to understand what happened to James, you must first understand the world that built the cage around him long before he was ever cornered inside it. Belmont Hall stood on 400 acres of polished deception. Columns, gardens, imported furniture, every detail engineered to project civility. Visitors spoke of refinement, culture, Christian charity. But beneath the polished veneer, another truth pulsed like a sickness in the walls. Power without accountability breeds corruption, and corruption, when left unchecked, becomes ritual. Marcus Sutherland, the master of this estate, prided himself on being enlightened, a moderate among men who openly embraced brutality. He fed his enslaved workers, clothed them adequately, avoided the spectacle of violence. He believed this made him humane. But men convinced of their own virtue are often the most dangerous because they never question the rot underneath their own feet. His version of kindness was still ownership, still control, still the belief that every life on that soil existed to serve his lineage. And then there was Arabella, 20 years younger than her husband, raised in a crumbling Charleston family where beauty was currency and silence was survival. She entered Belmont Hall like a polished ornament, placed beside a man who had lost interest in her long before she understood the loneliness that awaited her. And loneliness, when paired with unchallenged authority, can mutate into something far more predatory than anger. She noticed James not because he sought attention, he avoided it, but because he carried a presence that contradicted the structure around him. Skilled, disciplined, composed. A young man who moved like he understood exactly how fragile the plantation's illusion of order truly was. That quiet dignity so natural to him, so forbidden in their world, became the spark. And sparks, in a dry room full of old timber, do not stay small. It began with glances, then questions, then orchestrated moments, short encounters dressed as coincidence. James did nothing to encourage them. He couldn't. Every breath he took near the main house was measured. Every word weighed like it could become a weapon used against him. Because it could. What makes this story truly dark is not simply what happened, it is how the entire structure around him allowed it to unfold. A society that punished the enslaved for the desires of the free. A legal system designed to convert white shame into black suffering. A household where everyone saw the danger but no one could stop it. James did not fall into tragedy. He was pushed slowly, deliberately by forces older than him, richer than him, and far more prepared to protect themselves than to tell the truth. There's a moment in every descent where a man realizes the walls around him aren't just closing and they were built that way from the start. James reached that moment in the spring of 1847, when the house repairs brought him into Arabella's orbit day after day. He wasn't naive. He had grown up in a world where white desire became black punishment with terrifying speed. He had seen men beaten for standing in the wrong place, for being noticed by the wrong person, for nothing at all except breathing in a moment someone found inconvenient. He knew the rules of survival. And yet, rules only work when the powerful have boundaries. Arabella had none. Every encounter tightened the noose. At first, she lingered in doorways under the guise of curiosity, asked harmless questions about the forge, commented on the craftsmanship of tools he had learned to make under Thornhill's steady instruction. Each question pulled him a little closer, not by choice, but by orbit. Then the distance shrank. A hand grazing too near, a comment spoken too softly, intent disguised as politeness, predation wearing refinement like a mask. James responded with absolute discipline. Eyes lowered, voice steady, movements precise. But in a system built on the delusions of the powerful, even perfect behavior could be twisted into guilt. And Arabella was a woman used to getting what she wanted not by force, but by the invisible privilege that made her desires unquestionable. In her world, wanting something was the same as deserving it. And a young man like James, skilled, composed, physically capable, became an object on which to project everything her marriage no longer gave her. The day she summoned him to her private room, he walked in already knowing danger lay on the other side of the door. But refusal was impossible. Approach was dangerous. Compliance would destroy him. There was no correct move in the trap she had built. When he tried to step back, she interpreted it as defiance. When he tried to stay still, she framed it as consent. In the distorted logic of power, his silence became implication, his fear became accusation, his restraint became evidence. And then just as quickly she flipped the narrative. A calculated apology, a calm tone, a casual request for a simple repair, a conversation staged in the open, where witnesses could attest to her composure. She rewrote the moment in real time, turning his caution into complicity. By the time he walked out of that room, she had already laid the groundwork. If he ever spoke, his truth could be dismissed as an impropriety he had initiated. That was the moment the story turned fatal quietly, invisibly. This is where the descent sharpens, where fear stops being an emotion and becomes a constant companion, sitting on a man's shoulder, whispering every possible outcome, every punishment, every lie that could end his life. After Arabella's calculated apology, James understood with absolute clarity that she had shifted the battlefield. The danger was no longer the moment in her private room. It was everything that would follow. Because a powerful person who feels rejected rarely retreats, they recalibrate. For the next several days, James tried to disappear. He worked longer hours in the forge, avoided the main house, kept to the shadows. But absence itself can be interpreted as defiance, and on plantations like Belmont Hall, defiance, real or imagined, was a crime with no defense. The enslaved lived under a surveillance far more suffocating than chains. The constant evaluation of their every breath by people who believed themselves morally entitled to judge their existence. The women in the house staff saw it first. Sarah, who had warned him weeks earlier, watched Arabella move through rooms with an energy that did not belong to routine. Servants notice everything, especially the subtle shifts in the faces of the privileged. Sarah saw the narrowing of the eyes, the impatient glances toward timelines, the tension masked by politeness. And she knew. A choice had been made somewhere behind Arabella's silence, and when a woman like her made a decision that touched an enslaved life, the consequences always traveled downward. Then came the day Marcus Sutherland left for Richmond. 10 days away from the estate. 10 days without his presence, without his moderating shadow, without the one force, however flawed, that kept Arabella's impulses constrained by the image of marital respectability. When Marcus departed, a new atmosphere settled over Belmont Hall. Quiet, watchful, almost anticipatory. On the morning after his departure, Arabella sent for James again. He arrived at her sitting room with caution sharpened into instinct. The door was open. Sarah was within sight. Everything appeared harmless, almost mundane. But the danger in this moment wasn't what Arabella would do in that room. It was what she was engineering around it. Her tone was calm, her apology rehearsed, her request modest. She was not seeking an encounter. She was rewriting the past, reframing it, creating an official version of events in which she was dignified, composed, and benevolent, and James was merely a servant misunderstanding his place. In a system defined by hierarchy, whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. And make no mistake, she was claiming the narrative. What James didn't yet understand but would soon was that Arabella wasn't simply offended by his refusal. She was insulted, humiliated. Rejection, to someone raised in the privilege of unquestioned authority, does not register as a boundary. It registers as betrayal, and betrayal requires correction. There is a point in every forbidden story where the real danger stops hiding, where it steps forward, silent and deliberate, and wraps its hands around the fate of the person who can no longer escape it. For James, that moment arrived during the quiet evenings after Arabella's carefully staged reconciliation. She had set the trap. Now she intended to close it. James felt it first as a shift in the air, not something you see, but something your instincts register before your mind can articulate it. Overseers began appearing in places they normally didn't. Conversations hushed when he entered a room. The blacksmith Thornhill, usually gruff but predictable, carried a tension in his shoulders that told James something unspoken was moving beneath the surface. The household itself, walls, hallways, routines, felt like they were rearranging around him, tightening into a corridor with only one way out. And Arabella? She was composed. Too composed. Her smiles during breakfast service. Her calm questions to Sarah about household inventories. Her polite inquiries to Marcus in letters about the success of his Richmond negotiations. Everything about her became symmetrical, orderly, controlled. That is the kind of calm, powerful people display only when they have already decided how the next chapter will end. James tried to speak with Thornhill again, but the old man had grown grim. He sensed the danger but could do nothing to stop it. "Just keep your head down," he whispered. "Don't give her reason." But they both knew the truth. She no longer needed reason. She only needed opportunity. And opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. 3 days into Marcus's absence, Arabella summoned James at dusk, not to her sitting room, but to the garden path behind the east veranda. Public area. A place where her presence near him would appear innocent. He arrived with caution, standing a full 6 feet away, hands clasped behind his back. She pretended not to notice the distance. "James," she said softly, "you've been avoiding the main house." He kept his voice steady. "Just tending to my assigned work, ma'am." "A shame," she replied. "You do such fine work. Marcus has always spoken well of your discipline. I had hoped that misunderstanding between us was behind us." The words were gentle, but underneath them lay a blade. Because this wasn't a conversation, it was documentation. A performance. She was crafting witness-friendly language, the kind that could later be repeated, twisted, weaponized. She was building a record without ink. Then she stepped closer. Not close enough to break propriety, but close enough that anyone watching would see her as the calm, rational party making an effort, and James as the one refusing. That moment could later be retold as evidence of insolence. Evidence of impropriety. Evidence of whatever she needed it to be. The frightening part is this: James could not step forward. But stepping back would be seen as defiance. So he froze, caught in the deadly stillness between two interpretations, both fatal. That night, Sarah found him outside the quarters, staring at the river. She lowered her voice to a whisper that trembled with urgency. "She's building something," Sarah said. "I don't know what, but she's setting up a story. And when she tells it, nobody's going to listen to your version. This is how power moves in the dark, quietly, strategically, behind manners and gentle tones. Not with whips, but with narratives. With reputations. With lies that sound like truth because truth has no voice in the rooms where decisions are made." And in that silence, in that tightening net, James began to understand the truth Arabella had never spoken out loud. She wasn't finished with him. She had only begun. The passage narrows until it becomes almost child-small, forcing the team to crawl. The air is no longer just cold. It moves, like something breathing in the dark. Alara freezes. There's airflow, but it's not natural. It's rhythmic. Jonas presses a hand to the stone wall. It's like the mountain itself is pulsing. Then the corridor opens into a dome-shaped cavern, unlike anything they've seen so far. The walls are obsidian smooth, carved with spirals that seem to shimmer when no one is looking directly at them. In the center lies a raised stone dais with veins of gold and iron that converge into a perfect circle, almost like an eclipse caught mid-formation. Dr. Marek's voice drops to a whisper. "This is impossible. The patterns, see how they bend? They're reversing orientation depending on where you stand." Jonas circles the chamber. They flip. Left becomes right. Up becomes down. It's like the geometry is lying. Alara steps onto the dais. Instantly, the chamber hums. A low vibration rattles the tools, the stones, their bones. Then, the spirals begin to rotate. Not physically, not mechanically, but in the mind. The shapes twist through perception itself, slipping between interpretations like a visual hallucination no one can wake up from. Alara stumbles back. "Stop. Don't look directly at the markings." But it's too late. Jonas is gripping his head. "It's rewriting what's real. I can't tell what's straight or crooked, what's behind me, what's..." He almost falls, catching himself on the wall. Dr. Marek, strangely, seems unfazed. His eyes gleam with a fervor that was never there before. "It's not an illusion," he says, voice steadier than it should be. "It's a filter, a device meant to invert perception, to show the world not as it is, but as they needed it to be." Alara narrows her eyes. "They? Who is they?" But Marek doesn't answer. Instead, he places his hand on the spiraling wall. And the chamber awakens. The golden veins in the dais flare like molten circuits. The harmonic vibration deepens. Their flashlights die instantly. Only the spirals glow now, pulsing like eyes adjusting to the presence of strangers. The team is caught in a sensory loop. Distance collapses. Direction collapses. Speech becomes echoes before spoken. Jonas hears his own scream before he opens his mouth. Alara's shadow moves independently of her body. And Dr. Marek? He stands perfectly still at the center of it all, whispering something in a language none of them know. Yet all three of them understand as though it's being injected directly into their thoughts. When the spirals stop moving, Alara is no longer sure whether they've been inside the chamber for 10 seconds or 10 hours. Jonas collapses, trembling. "Marek, what did you just do?" Dr. Marek turns toward them slowly. His eyes are not entirely his own. "This chamber," he says, "isn't meant to be entered." A pause. "It is meant to be activated." The lights flicker back. But now, the exit tunnel behind them is gone. Or maybe, it never existed at all. The chamber's glow fades to a dull, internal ember, leaving Alara and Jonas staring at the smooth wall where the exit once was. Dr. Marek runs his fingers along the seal, murmuring as if listening to someone whispering back. Jonas staggers upright, still disoriented by the chamber's warping effects. "Alara, that tunnel was right there. We came through it. We did." Alara keeps her light on the wall. "No. It didn't move. We did." Behind them, the spirals pulse again, one slow heartbeat. Then the floor trembles. A seam splits open near the base of the chamber, stone grinding against stone. Dust pours out like smoke. A rectangular block lowers into the floor, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into a deeper darkness. Jonas steps back.
No.
No chance I'm going down another, but a sound rises from the new passage. Not mechanical, not human. A voice, soft, measured, speaking a language that seems familiar by emotion alone. Alara's breath catches. Jonas. It's the voice we heard in the chamber. It's speaking through the structure. Marek's face lights with something unsettlingly close to reverence. It's inviting us, he whispers. Jonas stares at him. Inviting us? Or luring us in? It doesn't matter, Marek replies, stepping onto the first stair. We've already been chosen. Alara hesitates, but the passage behind them is sealed, and they have no supplies to last a night inside the chamber of reversal. So she descends after him. Jonas curses under his breath, then follows. The stairs are carved from the same impossible smoothness as the spirals, lit faintly by thin seams of gold running along the walls. Their footsteps echo unnaturally delayed, distorted, sometimes sounding as if coming from ahead of them instead of behind. After a dozen turns, Jonas freezes. Alara, look at the walls. He presses his hand to one. There's movement under the stone, like shadows swimming. No, shapes. Rows of thin, elongated figures carved into the rock, so shallow they could be mistaken for cracks. But they are not static. Their outlines softly shimmer as if shifting position, turning toward the descending trio. Alara tightens her grip on the railing. These aren't carvings. They're recordings. As if in response, the nearest silhouette tilts its head. Jonas steps back. Nope. Nope, Alara. These things are looking at us. Marek places his palm on the figure. Instantly, all the shadow shapes freeze in perfect stillness. They aren't alive, he says calmly. They're watchers, archivists. They record presence, movement, thought. This place, it's an archive of human consciousness, a vault of subjective memory. Alara stares at him. Marek, how do you know that? He doesn't answer. He simply keeps walking. The staircase ends abruptly, opening into a massive subterranean gallery. Pillars of black stone support a ceiling so high it drifts into darkness. Along the walls, thousands of those shifting silhouettes stand like silent witnesses. But in the center of the hall is something else entirely. A single seated figure, much larger than human, forged from gold-veined basalt. Its posture is regal, its head bowed slightly. Where the face should be, there is only a featureless plane smooth as water. Yet as they approach, a ripple crosses that blank surface, forming an expression without details and emotional contour. And then it speaks, not aloud, inside their minds. You have opened the reversal. You have come for what was taken and what must be returned. Jonas collapses to his knees, clutching his ears though no sound exists. Alara forces herself to speak. What are you? What is this place? The figure rises, massive, silent, effortless, its form bending light itself as if gravity accommodates it. I am the archivist below, the curator of lost histories, the guardian of the knowledge your world abandoned. Marek steps forward, eyes wide, trembling with awe. You called me here. The archivist tilts its head toward him. One of you hears. One of you remembers. One of you will be unmade. Alara's throat tightens. Which one? But the archivist's faceless expression distorts, as if smiling without a mouth. That depends on who ascends. Jonas whispers to Alara. I don't think we were invited. I think we were summoned. And deep beneath the mountain, the archivist's hall begins to tremble. The air grows heavy, thick with expectation, like the world itself is holding its breath. The archivist towers above them, a silhouette of impossible scale, a presence that bends perception with every blink. The walls of the hall seem to pulse in response to its attention, veins of gold glowing brighter, casting shadows that twist into fleeting shapes of memory lives, decisions, betrayals, and desires long buried. Every step forward feels like a step into a man's own conscience, where judgment waits silently, not with malice, but with inevitability. Marek's face is pale, his hands shaking. We don't belong here, he whispers. His voice echoes through the hall in a way that's not his own. Jonas shakes his head, still on his knees, terrified by the intensity of the presence. Alara, breathing fast, realizes the hallucination is not a hallucination. It's the archivist reflecting the truth of their own perception, and in its reflection, there is no room for pretense. No lies survive. The archivist moves fluid, silent, yet unmistakable, and their minds feel the weight of its awareness. Knowledge rushes into them unbidden. Centuries of forgotten history, hidden manipulations of empires, the subtle webs of control that have shaped human behavior long before any record. And within that torrent, they see one story clearly: the story of James Rutledge. The young man whose life was stolen by entitlement, cruelty, and obsession centuries ago, erased from ledgers, erased from memory, almost erased from the world. It is in that moment they understand what the archivist is offering: the knowledge of the forbidden, the truth of the hidden, and the terrible weight of seeing the machinery of human corruption in full motion. And with that truth comes choice. Alara whispers aloud, though it is unclear whether she addresses the archivist or herself. What do we do with it? The archivist's presence flows through them, not in words, but as certainty. The past must be remembered, not for vengeance, but for awakening. The stories that have been suppressed, the patterns that have been repeated, the silent cries of those erased from history, they all demand recognition. And now, listeners, I want you to do something. Type this phrase twice in the comments. I see what they hide. Do it twice. Say it aloud in your mind as you write it. Lock it in. This is more than engagement, it is a symbolic recognition of truth, an acknowledgement that knowledge carries power, and that power carries responsibility. Because once you acknowledge the hidden, once you allow yourself to truly see, you are changed. The illusion of safety, of ignorance, no longer protects you. The corridors of influence, obsession, and suppressed truth become visible. And you, like James Rutledge, stand at the threshold of understanding a world that few are permitted to comprehend. The archivist recedes, leaving them in the hall alone, but the hall itself is no longer what it was. Every stone, every shadow, every pulse of light is now a reminder. Some knowledge can never be unlearned, and the man who walks forward carrying it will never be the same again. History is not neutral. Power is not kind. And truth, when revealed, is the only liberation. The descent is complete, and from it, only those willing to confront the weight of reality can rise. You are witnessing a truth that was buried for over a century. Comment, I see what they hide, twice to mark yourself as someone who refuses to remain blind. Share this with anyone who thinks they can handle the secrets of power, obsession, and forbidden history. Step into the shadow and see what most will never know.